Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next installment of The Recruiter of Oz. So, for today's session, we're going to talk about the monies.
Yes. The big conversation.
Yeah, this is like it's like the dance that we do, right? You like meet
Absolutely.
somebody, like you don't want to talk about like, the thing, but eventually it's going to come down to money. And so as
Right.
the company and the recruiter and sourcer do the dance and reach out to candidates, trying to find out the candidate's experience, but also trying to figure out if the candidate's compensation needs are in line with the company's. And a lot of times it's not.
So true. But, fortunately, with the way things have changed in the last couple of years with the mandatory reporting in a number of states for what a salary range is and whatnot, it's a lot easier to discern that, though there are a number of companies who still are holdouts in terms of kind of reporting or sharing that information proactively.
Yes, yeah, those are the companies that are like, yeah, this job pays anywhere from like 10K to 500,000.
Exactly. Well, I'd like the top end of that, please. Thank you.
So we're going to talk about in this session, we're going to talk about how to kind of figure out market rates, how to find out maybe the salary on your own, ask the right questions, using some tools to help you do this. We'll also talk about how to see the kind of like the cost of like living and salary differences from location to location, because like we're living in this like whatever you want to call it, remote or hybrid world, or whatever this world of work that we have nowadays. Yes, a lot of companies want their employees to come back in the office, but there's still a good amount of remote roles out there.
Right.
And depending on the industry that you're in, for instance, like recruitment, for my industry, a lot of those roles will stay remote. So that's the case. Now, if you're like engineering, they might actually want them to be in the office, something like that. But
Hmm.
for a lot of these other roles, they're still remote or they're hybrid, right? Where they want you to come in like a couple days a week and then the rest of it you can be at home.
And within that conversation, even though we probably won't touch this, but we have in previous episodes, it's really also looking at hiring methods of companies who aren't based in more expensive metropolitan areas like California or New York or Boston or whatever the case may be. And basically how those companies stay competitive when you're looking for the top cream of the crop candidate, whether they might be in California, New York, or whatnot.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll also talk about what to do if the salary conversation is brought up at the beginning of the process,
Hmm.
or should you talk about it at the end of the process, or what to do if maybe the salary is brought up and it's actually not going to work for you. It's below whatever it is that you need. You're like, no, I need to live in my mansion. I got my payments on my three Mercedes. I have like, alimony payments to like three ex-wives. I need to make this amount of money.
Right. Right.
Or whatever your situation is. So yeah, let's talk about it. Let's figure this out. So first of all, market rates. So this is kind of like something that you should do just anyways, because you can have a standard of living that you need to meet, right? Whatever that is for wherever
Hmm.
you live. But you also need to kind of like check your expectations. And one of the ways to do this is to utilize free tools that are out there. And I will say this, there are a good amount out there. You have to take it
Hmm.
with a grain of salt, because a lot of the information is kind of like, crowdsourced. So
Right. Right.
take it with a grain of salt. But any tool that you might have used could be one like levels.fyi. That's like one. You could use Indeed to do it. You could use salary.com to do it. You can even use, I've even seen people do this, especially recruiters and sourcers. You could do like Quora if you believe the answers on
Yes.
there. Reddit, right?
Hmm. But I think also, Mark, that you want to kind of emphasize the differences in these sites. I mean, you're going to get more reliable and less reliable information depending on where you go and how you do those searches. Um, So I'm curious though, before we really dive into this, I mean, the one that I've used in the past was salary.com, but I've also found that there is a huge disparity when you're doing a salary search on the free side versus a paid salary search. So is that something you
Yes.
are going to chat about as well?
Yes. So I haven't done the paid for one, but I imagine the paid for one is more accurate. I feel like the free version on the salary.com is like more general. Like you can't get as
Right.
granular and divide it up in terms of like maybe levels or industries as you could with like the paid for version. In fact, here, let me show you that one first here. Let me share my screen.
Cool.
So
And go ahead.
this
Sorry.
is, you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is salary.com. So I can come over here, I can put something in like recruiting manager, and then it will bring up all these different titles. Then you kind of just click on the one that matches what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're going to give you a range. Now don't panic when you see this range because it is a range. Now it's more importantly, it's a range for basically like across all industries. So you're
Sure.
going to get everything. I mean, look at this. See, you have 121 on the super low end, 187 on the super high end. So for instance, let's say you're working at like a recruiting agency where you're notoriously going to get underpaid.
Mm-hmm.
Those are going to be like your numbers on the left side of this bell curve here. For your more kind of like mid-tier companies, then you might get paid around the median. And then for like your Google, Facebook type companies, it'll be the 90 percentile or above. So this is a huge variety of everything that you could find in the Bay Area. It's definitely not a one company size fits all, but it does give you some idea of what's out there.
And I was confused by that too. So when I first started using salary a number of years ago, I'd look at the 10th, 25th, 75th, 50th, and 90th percentiles, and I would kind of equate that to what the candidate is bringing to the table in terms of experience, skill set, managerial experience, things like that, as opposed to the company size. But I think where you don't get as targeted a view is with something like this, even though this encompasses where you will likely be, where you really start seeing, in my opinion, the value is when you do those paid research or paid report pieces, because situations like this, they'll allow you to basically define all parameters, including size of company, how many years experience you have, what
Yeah.
your most recent job level was, and things like that. So you're going to get, again, a very different opinion. I don't know if you can actually do that for free now, though. I mean, you can do a certain amount of defining parameters on the free version.
Yeah. And there's the other thing I like about salary.com is you can kind of like scroll to the higher level jobs. And
Mm-hmm.
I think they all max out at like director, I believe.
Okay.
But still, that's good. I mean, everything from like your entry level jobs all the way up to director, that's like a pretty good amount of um, choices that you have there.
Right.
So
Agreed.
that's definitely a site that I would at least look to see kind of like where you line up um, with everything else.
Excellent.
Now,
So aside from salary, I mean, you mentioned places like levels.fyi. That's something I hadn't heard about before. Could you kind of touch on that? Because I'm interested in hearing more.
yeah, so Levels is kind of like a crowdsourced tool with things related to like the different levels of like engineers or professional services type
Mm-hmm.
employees at companies. You can compare titles versus levels. You can compare salaries for those titles. They don't have everything in here. You can search by company or you can do stuff related to title. So for instance, I can come over here and say, okay, well, I'm, you know, operations, like general product manager, for instance,
Right, right.
or come over here to like marketing, right? And then get the salaries for those. You can also put in companies, right? So if you have a
Sure.
marketing type title, and depending on the level you're at, you can kind of like compare what you'd be making if you were an L5 at Google.
The thing that confuses me a little bit about this, though, and I like how they've got this arranged, but it doesn't go granular enough from what I'm seeing here right now. So within marketing, there's a whole lot of different disciplines, or as we would say in music,
Exactly.
subgenres, and some of those command premiums. So basically, this should be looked at as basically a starting point and a guide, I would imagine, right? Not kind
Yes,
of the end all be all.
this is definitely the free version. Now, if you want to pay for like the real stuff, you can do that.
Okay,
That's up to you if you want to do that. Like, I don't really like paying for that, but you can.
gotcha.
Now, if you want something that is free and it gives you a multiple kind of like selection of ranges for salaries, then I would suggest looking actually at Indeed.
Really?
Because Indeed, I can come over to here and I can say, okay, well, I want to find salaries for communications directors in the Bay
Mm-hmm.
Area. And so you enter that enter in your location. And the great thing about an Indeed is if the company discloses the salary, which a lot of times they do, you can see
Mm-hmm.
the range that they're talking. Now, Apple, of course, didn't do theirs, but you can see there's plenty of other companies that are. And you can kind of see, okay, well, I'm a director of communications. I can kind of see what I'm going to get paid. Like Juniper, they're going to
Right.
pay me this range here. Intel, same thing. TikTok, same thing. So gives you an idea of what you can expect and what you can kind of go in and kind of have that conversation. If you
So sorry to interrupt really quickly. I'm curious, Mark. So with a situation like this, some of these kind of don't resonate with me in terms of being aligned with what I've found to be those actual job ranges. Is this or is Indeed similar to a Glassdoor in that if there's not a salary range stated in a lot of cases, they'll make their own estimate, or is that not what they do?
That is a great question. I think the company provides this, don't they? Actually, I'm not sure. Let me see here. Let me pick one. The reason why I think the company provides it is because, hold on here. Here, Stanford.
Yeah.
So here's Stanford. Now, if Indeed was just going to provide a salary, I imagine they would provide something a lot higher than
Well, maybe. I
what.
mean, given the fact that it's education and you're going to kind of take the hit there, but
Okay. This gives us our answer right here. So,
what's that?
okay, never mind. We got our answer. So
Okay.
this salary looks like it's pulled from the what the company says. See this one here where it says estimated.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
Indeed.
okay.
That's Indeed saying, hey, based on what we've seen here, this is what we think the salary will be. The job doesn't say what the salary is.
Okay, so it's very similar to a Glassdoor in that, where that information is available, they're going to post it. But if there's not, they're going to kind of extrapolate from similar roles. Okay, I get it. That's cool.
Yeah. So, but that's good though. Gives you an idea. So like you can see
Hmm.
either like they have a concrete number that they pulled somewhere in the job site, or
Right.
they're doing their estimate. So,
Okay.
and then Apple's like, you don't know what you're gonna make. You're just gonna be at Apple.
So
Be
there
at
it is right
Apple.
there.
Oh,
So
it's right there.
that's interesting that they wouldn't have put that up there. Well, there's a decent base salary. Not that I'm, commenting on specific roles, but wow, neat.
There you go. So yeah, so that's
Okay.
Indeed. So definitely worth looking at. So between like salary, Indeed, salary.com, Indeed, and
Levels.
levels.fyi, these are, gives you a good idea of what you can, what you can expect. And
Okay.
that's all the free tools. Now there are paid for tools, but I'm not going to demo them because I don't have subscriptions to them, and I'm never going to have subscriptions to them. But there are paid for tools like, PayScale and the Radford survey. But
Hmm.
those are usually like companies usually fork out the money for those. And then Glassdoor and salary.com do have like their paid for subscriptions. So those ones
Yeah.
are probably more for like, individuals who want to find out, more about those salaries.
Interestingly enough, I've actually done the salary.com one in the past. And I did it because it was recommended by one of the HR directors that I was speaking with. And he
Hmm.
said, if you're really looking to get a specific range for a salary, you can go into salary.com and enter all of those parameters that are relevant to the business. And those are actually very accurate from his experience.
Hmm.
So I did that. But the problem with that was, I mean, I haven't done it for probably 10 years, was really that you're paying at that point $40 per report, and you're only
Oof.
getting one data set. So it was basically small. I was doing small, mid-sized businesses with this many employees, this much revenue, and this is the job, and all of the different details around that. So basically, it wasn't something that I could just take to any employer and use. But I don't know if it's changed or not. That's just how it was 10 years ago.
Right, right. Yeah, I don't know if I would. Yeah, I don't know if I would fork out the money for that.
Yeah.
So that's to kind of set the stage for what you need to know before going into these jobs. Now, with all the recent laws, yes, companies are going to put the salary ranges on the descriptions. Even in LinkedIn jobs, they show up there. But
Mhm.
what do you do once you actually start talking to a recruiter or a sourcer? Like, when does this conversation happen, or when would you like it to happen?
Are you asking me?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
well, I honestly, I would like that to be less emphasized, because really, if a sourcer or recruiter or hiring manager is placing so much emphasis on the range of the salary and trying to understand what I'm looking to earn, that is a red flag for me, because basically that means that the salary and trying to fit within a box is going to be more important than what skills and experience that candidate brings to the table. So ideally, the further on in the process, the better. Although there have been in my experience a number of recruiters, most of the time this is what happens actually, where one of the first things they ask you as the last part of the screening is, okay, so we have to ask about this, what's coming, it's the salary conversation. And it's gotten interesting. So I mean, going back to that whole change in the way companies provide and report salaries and salary ranges,
Right.
the conversation looks a lot different now than it did 2 years ago or 5 years ago. So, what happens now is they will ask me, what are you looking to make? And so I now turn it around on them. I said, well, given the fact that we're now being more transparent in the way we report these things, why don't you tell me what the range of the salary is? And without flinching, all the time, recruiters are just like, okay, this is the range of the salary.
Hmm.
And then, so if there is that fundamental disparity, and I've had a few of those, where someone will offer, or they'll say this maxes out at 50K under where you were, I'll always go, okay, well, let me tell you what I was making before, and then maybe we can have a conversation there. Obviously, there's more to the conversation than just a base salary, but ideally, I would like to be a little closer to where I was. So, then
We're gonna pay you an
that's
on-site coffee and donuts. How about that?
yeah. Well, hey, that'd be great if I was on site. Just
So the way that you described it is basically like what or the recruiter wants, what the company wants. They
okay.
want to, from the company side, they don't want to talk about the salary stuff up front. And for them, it's the same exact reason. If you make it all about the money, then there's less about like if it's a good match, if this is the
Right.
job that the person really wants to do, if this is the person that the company really wants. They want to like figure all of that out first and then start the negotiations on salary.
Okay, but in a perfect world, that's how it would work. Now, it's not been my experience. I've talked to probably 40 companies now in about 4 months,
Hmm.
and the majority come out right away with the screening.
Right away.
So let's talk about your salary expectations. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, let's not. Let's talk about the job. I want to learn more about this. And so it's interesting, because when you have that disparity, I found that a lot of them, the conversation's over. And
Yeah.
even if they really like you and they say, hey, you're a great fit for this role from what I can tell, but I can't put you forward because you want too much money.
Right. They're like, you're really great for this role. Why don't you come work for us for 100K less a year? How do you feel about that?
Exactly. And I think this goes back to the last one of the last episodes we did, and you were focusing on good versus bad recruiters,
Yeah,
where a recruiter is, a good recruiter is going to be focusing on not only that A group of candidates who are going to meet all of the needs for a particular position, but also a B group and a C group who are going to maybe bring a little bit less to the table, but be, still very valuable, but be willing to take that lower salary to build their careers
right.
up and their skill sets.
Exactly. So I think it's I think it's fine to talk about the range stuff. I think you want to communicate that to the recruiter or the sourcer, but also it's probably good, like if the range is never going to be, if there's nothing that's going to change with that, then it might be a good idea to kind of get all that stuff out of the way, like as early on as possible, instead of like
Mhm.
waiting to go all the way to the end of the process and then realize there's absolutely no way the company can afford to pay whatever it
Yeah,
is that you need them to pay you.
that's a fair point. One question I have for you though, because I don't want to be giving listeners the wrong idea, because again, my disclaimer is that I am not a recruiter, sourcer, professional, and I am not an expert in this area. I'm bringing my own experience into this. Mark is the professional. So when I say something like I will always offer up after hearing the salary range what my last salary is if there is a disparity. I'd like to hear from you, Mark. Is that a good approach or is that a bad approach?
No, I don't think it's bad. I mean, I think as long as like you say, as long as you say like what your range is, like they'll say like what their range is, you can say, okay, well, this is what my range is, and you guys can kind of find out if there's a match. I think
Sure,
that's okay.
sure.
I think it's okay to do. And then this actually goes into the next thing here.
Hmm.
If the base salary like is maxed out at whatever that number is that the company says, okay,
Hmm.
well, what else can you do for me? And so then you look at the two other things, direct and indirect compensation. And
Right.
so direct compensation would be everything else, stock options, bonus incentives, whatever those are.
Hmm.
And indirect would be, free lunches, scooter rides, like, all the stuff
Great
that,
work environment.
yeah,
Yes.
all the stuff that we got like really, jazzed about like 15 years ago that we're not
Yep.
jazzed about anymore. That would be the indirect compensation. The stuff that matters the most, though, um, is the stock options, the whatever the bonus plan is. And some companies do have a very good bonus setup.
Yeah.
And if it's a smaller company too, if it's like a startup, maybe it's like a couple hundred person sized company, maybe
Hmm.
it's an agency. If you're in recruitment and you work in the agency world, some of those
Hmm.
bonus structures can be set up quite nice as long as you perform. So it just
That's
depends.
interesting. And that has actually become so far in the conversations I'm having a big sell that they even have bonuses, because a lot of the companies I'm speaking with are startups, so they won't have that VCIP, very variable compensation incentive plan, I think what it's called, or
Yeah,
bonus. And so basically they don't have as much to work with in terms of a total compensation package. And I think I'm brainstorming this right now, Mark, but what happens then? So you have a company that looks pretty cool. It's got an interesting technology. It's a potential innovator and driver of a market, but they're trying to get top talent in, and they're basically using the base salary and equity in a
right.
pre-IPO situation as the main sell. What happens then? I mean, if you're looking to evaluate an offer like that versus an offer from an enterprise corporation that's going to come at you with, okay, you get your base, your salary, sometimes commission if you're sales or recruiting, you get equity, RSUs, whatever the case is. How do those smaller companies remain competitive? And as a candidate, from your perspective, what leverage do you have?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of it is there is part of it is a risk. Like,
Hmm.
for instance, before Instagram was bought by Facebook, right?
Hmm.
They were a company. They started getting heavy popularity and they were doing well. But when you first signed up to work at that company, you were not maybe getting as much money as like Google or something like that. And so
Mhm.
maybe they said, well, we're going to pay you a little less salary here, but we're going to give you potential stock options here, like whatever that is. Like they set it up so that there's a risk, but there's also a reward. And so it's up to
Right.
you if you want to do that. So there's tons of companies, right? I mean, if you just go on Angel List, or I guess it's called Well Found now.
I've never heard
Um,
of that.
yeah, but if you go there and you look at all of like the startups, have we talked about Angel List for job searching yet or no?
No, we haven't.
Oh, we'll have to do that. Well, that could be like a whole thing on its own. But there's tons of companies that are on there, startups, mid-sized companies,
Mhm.
and a lot of them, like, they're trying to just do like the salary stuff as well as like some sort of like future, options that could happen as long as they succeed, or as long as they get acquired, or as long as like
Right.
whatever happens. And there, you're not only buying into the company, but you're buying into the founders, you're buying into the VCs like dream of like getting this thing acquired for
Right.
however much money. So it's all part of the whole kind of game if you're in the whole startup, acquisitions, space.
Okay. Well, so that makes sense. I mean, you've got a totally different mindset of potential employees in those situations. I mean, the ones that are willing to take that gamble on startups. I found that I am, because
Yeah.
it's just it's more fun. I mean, there's less rigid frameworks involved with a lot of those companies. You get an opportunity to come in and really prove your mettle, and build out what you're looking to accomplish in your career. I found that it's a lot of fun, but then there's the downside of that too.
The
So,
downside is a real thing, right? The company doesn't meet expectations, investors lose faith,
hmm
round of funding is pulled, then all of a sudden everyone's looking at each other and they're like, okay, we can sell his arm for $20,000 on the black market.
right.
We can sell, so it's like that. So I think there's a risk. I think when you talk to a recruiter or sourcer, you should definitely ask them about the entire comp package and how it's divided. And that
Right.
way they don't just say salary, they say like stock, potential options, whatever that is. They say the incentive bonus plan and
hmm
anything else that they have.
Okay, that makes absolute sense. Now, I'm going to jump ahead to an episode that we've not yet defined, and see if you'd be willing to comment on this, Mark. I know this isn't necessarily something that would fall on in your wheelhouse all the time or at all, but say you have a situation where you're looking at a startup, or a candidate's looking at a startup, and it's an attractive startup. There's some really cool technology or a really cool product, and that person thinks that they can make a big difference coming in there, but when they get the offer, it's less than thrilling. So, do you care to comment on, kind of what a candidate has as far as options with something like that? I mean, you've got a flexible PTO time, you don't have a VCIP, you have a base salary, you have equity. Is there any recourse for that candidate to find the additional value that they need to justify joining a company like that?
So if you get an offer, you can still do negotiations and a counter offer. Like it
Oh, of
happens.
course.
So it doesn't hurt to try. It also depends on like how good you are and how much worth you are to the company that's trying to hire you. If
Okay, that's fair.
if it's a matter of like, hey, this candidate is asking for 10K more than what we're going to pay, and we
Yeah.
know very well that our budget is completely locked down and we cannot afford that.
Yeah.
Some companies will get creative to find ways to go find that money, move stuff around so that they can have that extra money accounted for in the budget. I will say that does happen,
hmm
but I would say very few cases that happens.
But there are other ways to offset that as well, right? I mean, you've got companies in recent years, and it's happened for a long time, but in recent years, I've seen a lot more incidents of companies being willing to offer signing bonuses.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I forgot to talk about that. Yes. So that's the other thing, signing bonuses. So that's the other thing you can do. And the great thing about signing bonuses is that I think it doesn't affect the budget the same way.
Right.
I forget however they do the accounting on that, the magic accounting, it doesn't work the same way. So the signing bonus is different than like a yearly like hit. And then some companies will specifically use that signing bonus to offset whatever that disparity is between what you want and what they can actually offer.
Right. And I'd imagine that's kind of, and I'm getting way down a rabbit hole here, but I'm thinking, say, you have a startup company and say the average tenure of an employee is 1 to 1.5 years because people want to get in, make a quick buck, and get out. It makes sense for the candidate to take that signing bonus because they're not going to have to worry about the annual recurring um, compensation
Right.
from what they're losing. So if they take that year, they take the signing bonus, make up for where they were, where they wanted to be, then maybe it makes sense. But I'm thinking, in a situation where a company automatically instates that concept of signing bonus, and they offer it proactively. Now, another question, and we're way down the rabbit hole now. I apologize, but if a company comes out and says, "Okay, we can't meet your salary requirements. We're only 20,000 off or so, but we are going to offer you a $40,000 signing bonus," and I've seen this happen a number of times. If do you have leverage there? And can you say, well, how about we do this? Would you be willing to cut that signing bonus in half and then advance me 1/4 or 1/2 of that signing bonus as part of the actual base?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess you could work it out however. I mean, I guess as long as it's like, yeah, I feel like that would affect the books though for the year if you did it any
Oh, it definitely
differently.
would, because then you
Yeah,
have annual recurring revenue, right? Or not revenue, but expenditures.
yeah. I don't know if that would be, I don't know if that would work. I think it's got to be like a one-time thing.
Yeah, I gotcha. Figured I would ask though. Okay,
But
so
still, the signing bonus thing is real, and that can be used to offset like some of these just differences. So definitely worth doing.
excellent.
Yeah. Now, the last question of this whole thing is, what do you do when you've done all the legwork, you've had the conversation on both sides about the range of the role, you know what the comp package is, you know what their bonus structures are, you add up everything and it's still way below what you're even willing to take, then
Yeah.
what do you do as
Okay,
a
but let's
candidate?
qualify that. Let's qualify that further, right? So you've got this situation where it's way below what you're willing to take, and let's say you've got two scenarios. The first scenario is you've got other offers on the table, and then the other scenario is you don't have anything in the fire.
Right, exactly. So if you don't have anything, then you just take it. No. If
Right.
you have other offers, well then for sure you leverage those other offers. Now, of course, this is something that all companies and recruiters hate, is people like leveraging offers, because
Hmm.
candidates do this all the time, and it can be frustrating if you're a recruiter or sourcer and like somebody is just using you to get a better offer somewhere else. Like it can
Yeah.
be unendingly frustrating.
Right.
But that is something that people do, and they'll say, hey, you know what, I'm going to be getting this, here's the offer letter, you have it, right
Hmm.
there. What can you do for me? And then that brings a whole new level of discussions. And there are some companies that are like, wow, yeah, great, good for you, man, and that's it, because like they
Enjoy
know they'll
that
never,
role.
yeah, they'll know that they'll never be able to meet it.
Yeah. Well, and an interesting side note to that, I have noticed that a lot of companies who are extending offers at this point are refusing to provide a written offer until they have a verbal agreement.
Yeah, exactly, to keep this thing from like happening, because otherwise it's just yeah, it's just words and negotiating, right?
Right. So
Yeah,
the other scenario, you don't have anything in the fire and there's nothing on the horizon at this point, and you've been looking, say, for 6 months. And what do you
right.
do?
Then you got to start looking at like your cost of living,
Hmm.
right? That's like probably the biggest thing. So there are tons of like cost of living calculators that are out there. There's
Hmm.
like your simple kind of like home accounting tools that you could use, but you look at your expenses, you look at like what is the bare minimum that you have to make. I mean, hopefully you already
Right.
know this, but if you don't, you look at that and say, okay, well, I know I need to make this much, otherwise it actually costs me money. Either it's going to cost me more money to take this job,
Hmm.
or I have to take this job, but then I have to take another job on top of that.
Right.
So that's like the next step that you have to do.
Oh, and that's such unending stress, I have to tell you. So,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is comparing cost of living between cities, because this is something that I think people know, but
mhm.
it's still, yeah, it's still a thing. Now, there's
Well, side
tons of
note,
cost of living
really quickly
calculators.
before you go into this, I think that it's particularly relevant now, given locations of companies and what they're accustomed to paying, given that remote work has become increasingly accepted. And even though there are some companies that are kind of backpedaling on that, most companies are willing to entertain remote work situations for candidates. But the problem that I'm seeing in these job postings has been that a company is going to base the salary range off many times where they're located without taking into account some of the higher meds. And I
Yeah.
think that that's a challenge. So back to you, Mark.
So let's say that you are bringing in 130K, and you live in the Bay Area.
Right.
A company doing the same thing to like meet that same cost of living in Chicago, that comparable income would be 84K.
Yep.
So the reason why this matters is because let's say you find a job with the exact same job title that you do. The
Hmm.
company is just based out of Chicago and they're just doing remote work.
Hmm.
The company then offers you 84K and you're like, wait, what? Why you what?
Yep.
I'm making, I need to make this much. Well, and the reason why they're doing that is very much because of that like cost of living.
Right.
Now, one thing that companies have to do is they do this thing like called zones. Have you ever seen this on job
Yes. I see
descriptions?
those often.
Yeah, zones. So they have things divided up in terms of like basically cost of living, like what it takes to like price things for that particular part of the country. But
Yep.
even that still can be pretty like there can be a pretty large disparity between those two things. I mean, even between Bay Area, which is actually one of the highest out there, highest incomes
Hmm.
out there, and then Los Angeles area, right? There's a
Right.
pretty big difference. So it's a good idea to have this handy to kind of just see what you're dealing with and how far apart you are from the rest of the world.
Absolutely. I think that that is key. So it's
Yeah.
becoming infinitely more complex to navigate the job market these days, I tell you. But
Now,
it,
and I will say this too. Let's say you're in
yeah,
Chicago
yeah,
and the company is like, hey, we're going to put you over and you're living in Chicago. And they're like, yeah, you can move over to, the Bay Area and we're going to give you a 20K raise. And you're like, yes. But the only problem is when you get over to the Bay Area and you have that 20K raise, you're actually going to be making less money than you were in Chicago because of the cost of living.
yeah, yeah. But that's an interesting comment as well. I know that my wife, she was in Arizona, and she's a former VP over at Bank of America, and basically she had a certain salary, and by Bay Area standards, it was pretty low. And when she needed to move to the Bay Area, they refused to give her any kind of bump. So she was stuck on, in the Bay Area on an Arizona salary. So
Right.
I'd be surprised if companies were so quick to proactively offer that kind of up or tick up in the salary.
Yep. It's a thing. It's a
Wow.
thing. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. There are, yeah, there are a lot of different ways you can look at this. It's a good idea to obviously you want to make sure that you want to work at the company, but it's a good
Right.
idea to get this stuff out of the way early on so that you're not just wasting your time, wasting the recruiter's time if there's like absolutely no way of getting more out of the offer or more out of the company. But that's just a couple of like different ways you can kind of help yourself out there for sure.
Absolutely. And I think that some of these resources are really useful. Well, actually, a lot of these resources are useful that you brought up, and that we can include those links in the description of the episode.
Yes, yeah, we'll do that. I'll save all these for everyone.
Very
Cool.
good. And I think that kind of brings us to the end of it. You want to take us out?
Yes, thank you for watching the Recruiter of Oz podcast. We will see you guys on the next one.
Ah, yes.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.